Okay, so let's start digging into some of the specific issues that have been on the table at these meetings. One of the big issues has been the IDA financing package, which I think, Michael, you've been following. The bank is in the midst of an important fundraising effort for the International Development Association, which works with some of the world's least developed countries. So what do we know about how that's going so far, and what are the big issues involved in this?
Thanks. So I think it's right to see this as one of the first big tests for Malpass's presidency. The bank, every 3 years, goes through this replenishment of the International Development Association. This is the 19th time that they've done it. 3 years ago, they were successful in securing a record replenishment of $75 billion for IDA. They did that in part through some financial engineering and going to the capital markets to raise money. So that's not $75 billion that came directly from donors. There was some sort of creative financing involved in that. But this year, they've targeted the same amount plus inflation, basically. So at least matching what was previously a very ambitious fundraising target. I think a lot of eyes are on the bank and on Malpass to see if they'll be able to reach that. My understanding has been that donors have reached quite a solid consensus, both on kind of the financing package as well as the policy side. And that's where things get kind of interesting with IDA, because as the banks fund for least developed countries, it's sort of this vehicle through which the bank's member states can express their priorities. What do they want to focus on? What do they think is most important in trying to eradicate extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity, the bank's twin goals? And so IDA kind of breaks down into these multiple different priorities, the balance of which depends on kind of the strength of the donors that are pushing them. So those are things like climate change, human capital, which you mentioned, and I think one of the things that's gained prominence under President Malpass, which makes particular sense, and we can talk about why, given that he came out of the Trump administration, is this focus on debt and debt transparency. So it's really up to the bank at this point and the bank's shareholders to determine kind of the relative weight of these different priorities and then how the money should break down between them. And so it will be interesting in December when the replenishment becomes public. There will be a meeting this weekend, but the actual announcement happens in December to see, how the bank shareholders are kind of positioning it in terms of some of the big global priorities that we're seeing. There's been an interesting debate about the role of the private sector in this conversation. So under the last IDA replenishment, they created something called the private sector window, which allows IDA's resources to flow through IFC, the International Finance Corp, the bank's private sector arm, and to support private investment in developing countries. That's raised some interesting questions around transparency and accountability at IFC and sort of how much added value the bank is bringing to the table when it makes those investments versus, could the private sector just do them on their own? And that's garnered quite a bit of scrutiny